There is a reason Cold War engineers were, well, obsessed with temperature control. They knew that a shelter could be built from reinforced concrete, stocked with rations, and buried under meters of earth. But the moment a blizzard hit, everything came down to a far more primitive danger than enemy fire: the cold. During the 1950s and 60s, the Soviets, Americans, Scandinavians, and even smaller European defense ministries poured enormous effort into a simple question that determined whether underground crews survived or froze. The challenge was, honestly, brutal. How do you keep a subterranean bunker habitable when the outside world drops to temperatures so low that even steel contracts and cracks? How do you maintain warmth without electricity, fuel deliveries, or constant human oversight? For the first minute of this story, you should understand why this trick matters today. In any true winter survival scenario, whether you're stuck in a power outage, sheltering in place during a storm, or camping in harsh wind and snow, the biggest threat isn't lack of supplies or predators. It's losing the ability to maintain heat in a closed space without burning through resources. Modern cabins rely on propane. Modern homes rely on electric heaters. Modern vehicles rely on battery-powered climate systems. But Cold War shelters used a method that required almost no energy, endured months at a time, and still works flawlessly today. Now let's step directly into the real mechanism that kept these shelters from freezing even during the worst blizzards. Cold War engineers relied on controlled earth mass heating rather than active heating systems. Instead of trying to heat the shelter from within, engineers learned to stabilize temperature by harnessing the constant warmth of the earth itself. Several nations independently discovered that once a structure was buried beyond a certain depth, the surrounding soil maintained a stable temperature year-round. But the genius came in how they shaped the shelters to maximize this natural insulation. Thick, reinforced walls were only part of the equation. The real secret was the strategic use of thermal buffering, where the earth was treated as a massive heat battery. This method meant that even when the surface was hammered by blizzards, with wind chills reaching -50, the bunker remained at a survivable temperature. Engineers paired this earth mass principle with slow exchange ventilation channels that prevented heat from being sucked out while still removing moisture and carbon dioxide. This system worked because the shelters were built with thermal zoning rather than uniform rooms. A typical Cold War bunker was divided into zones based on heat retention. For example, a narrow entry corridor acted as a sacrificial cold buffer, catching incoming drafts and preventing them from penetrating deeper rooms. The next chamber often held supplies or equipment and stabilized temperature further by virtue of its mass. Only after that transition did soldiers reach the living quarters. This layering of thermal zones was deliberate, and honestly, it is something modern survival structures rarely replicate. The principle is simple and deeply practical. Do not expose your most important living space to outside air. Give the cold a place to lose its strength before it reaches you. Even in a small off-grid cabin or emergency shed, creating a cold buffer vestibule can drastically slow heat loss. The Cold War shelters proved that even a 1-meter-deep mudroom could mean the difference between waking up chilled and conserving critical body heat through the night. The ventilation design ensured that fresh air entered without draining warmth. One of the great challenges of shelter survival is balancing ventilation with temperature. The Cold War solution avoided straight pipe vents that allow warm interior air to escape rapidly. Instead, they used long, gently curving intake and exhaust tunnels buried deep in the earth. Incoming air absorbed warmth from the soil as it travelled underground, while outgoing air cooled gradually, preventing condensation and frost build-up. You can actually replicate a version of this system today by routing an air intake pipe underground for several meters before it enters a structure. Even for homesteaders, small cabins or storm shelters, burying a simple PVC or metal duct about 2 feet deep stabilizes incoming airflow and, well, reduces heating needs. Cold War engineers simply perfected a concept that humans had used since ancient times, but they applied it with scientific precision. This method, you see, still works today because it depends on physics, not equipment. Unlike generators, heaters, or fuel-based systems, earth mass heating and controlled ventilation simply cannot fail. They cannot run out of power, freeze, or break down. That's exactly why many Cold War shelters remained functional long after they were abandoned. Decades later, explorers found interiors that had never dropped to dangerous temperatures. The Earth just kept doing its work. If you're a survivalist or, a history buff, the value here is pretty clear. Whether you're constructing a root cellar, a small emergency shelter, or even upgrading a rural home, borrowing these Cold War principles gives you a long-term, low-resource way to manage winter conditions. The method is straightforward: bury deeply, create thermal zones, slow the movement of air, and use the mass of the Earth to control temperature instead of fighting against it. The lesson, really, is that durable warmth depends on design, not heat sources. Cold War bunkers show us that the smartest way to survive winter isn't adding more heat. It's, quite simply, losing less of it. They mastered this at a time when energy scarcity, paranoia, and extreme weather demanded perfection. Today, those same principles remain just as effective. If you want more breakdowns of forgotten engineering tricks and survival methods that still outperform modern solutions, make sure you subscribe, share this video with fellow enthusiasts, and help grow this community of serious history thinkers.